Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sallenberger. On today's podcast, I chat with Seth Kopald about spirituality, self, and connection. Hey everyone, I am so excited about today's podcast. So I don't think I said this, but this is actually going to be the second of 3 podcasts about self. Last week was with Lot Kelly, and we talked about self. And this week, I'm talking with Seth about self. And next week, I will talk to Diana Richards about self, which I can't seem to say this morning, self-led eating, which I'm super excited about. So today, Seth and I talk about so many things. I outline 6 different topics we cover, which we cover so much, but basically we talk about spirituality and self. And I think that I think my favorite part was the ending where we talk about moving from our head to our heart, and Seth leads us in a little, probably 1 minute of doing that practice, and it's just really beautiful. So I hope you stay till the end where he leads us in that, and it's great. So I would love to hear what you think about this podcast, and I'd love to connect with you at the One Inside Facebook page, at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter, and now on Clubhouse. So I just want to let you know just a couple things about Seth. If you don't know Seth, Seth is a level 3 trained certified IFS practitioner. He was on the podcast before when he talked about parenting and organizational leadership. Seth is also well known on the Facebook community because he leads the one of the IFS and parenting Facebook pages and the IFS in arts. So you definitely want to check him out, follow him, and follow those pages because there's so much great material on both those pages. And you definitely don't need to be a practitioner or a therapist to be on either one of those pages. So check them out. Seth is just a great guy. I found that when I was listening back to this, I was like, hey, because I feel like I know Seth just from doing the podcast, and we've had some conversations, and then just sort of seeing his name on Facebook, you sort of feel like you know Seth, you know people that in that way. And I feel like Seth was trying to be serious, and I kept trying to be silly. So this a part of me noticed that Seth was being very serious, and I was just like, hey. I think I just wanted to speak for that. Hope everyone's doing well. Enjoy. So why don't you just start with telling everybody where you are in the world?
Okay.
Start with that, if that feels okay.
All right. Yeah. So I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ann Arbor, they often say, is a 6 square miles surrounded by reality because it's like a little kind of bubble of, University of Michigan, and I guess a probably liberal-ish city.
Yeah.
So it's my kind of reality. Works well for me. Yeah.
And you're surrounded by, are these things that you've made in your art behind you? Is there?
Actually, my wife and I decided to make this space kind of like an art studio. It used to be my office and a jeweler. I have a jeweler. You're sitting on my jewelry bench. So this side is her. But what you see behind me is her stuff, and that painting she did recently. And the colors, those are a lot of my colors that really feel good for me, and a lot of my clients, they seem to really like the orange and yellows and the golden light. I mean, that to me is really resonant of self energy. And then on my desk here, you can't really see it, but there's an old roll top desk with jewelry tools and all my sacred items and things that help me stay present.
Do you think that, sort of jumping in today, we want to talk about self. I think a lot of what we have planned. Do you think that color? So what? I'm just going to jump off of what you just said. Do you think that colors and objects help us connect to self?
I think it depends on the person, but for me, definitely.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. Like, I was like, oh, should I talk about everything that's around me? But I have I like to burn sage, and I have, different items from different traditions, and I have, for me, it's like a lot of nature things, like things made of wood and things that other maybe different spiritual traditions use as sacred items. And for me, it helps me stay in that space for some reason. And I also would say that at times with different colors, like some people might lean towards warm colors, some people might lean to cool colors, and something about, we know colors are also vibration, so wavelengths, and something about it gels with your system to help you feel good. And it might not be the same colors as me, but um, and also our chakras are different colors. So um, I've always seen self energy as kind of like a golden light. A lot of people see it as a white light, which really fits in with so many different spiritual traditions around things that are sacred. Usually have kind of a light around it.
Mm, yeah. So that starts us with this idea of incorporating IFS into people's religious and spiritual practices. And
Mm-hmm.
so tell me about that. Like, how do we begin to do that?
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I think this idea that you could apply something to your own religion to help with your own religion, I think started with when I read some Thich Nhat Hanh books. He's a Vietnamese Buddhist who protested the Vietnam War, and he lived in France for many years. Um, he mentioned that you could apply like Zen Buddhism to any religion. So you might, for instance, if you're a Christian, if you apply being present and being fully there in your prayers, then you could actually go deeper into your Christianity. So I'm really applying it the same way that I feel like when we are as in as much self energy as possible and we're engaging in our spiritual traditions, that we could fully connect with what we're trying to connect to. So if you're praying to a particular person or entity, or if you're somebody who's spiritual and you're connecting to the earth or you're connecting to the universe, I find that when we do that, when we're more parts led, we don't really find that deep connection. And that when we're in self, for one thing, self is already, I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, and I think Dick believes that when we're in self, that we're already connected to all things and all levels of things bigger than us. So when we tap in, we're already kind of there. But then if we express our spirituality through these different religions, whatever that may be, I think it's a deepening in a you almost get to feel what the religion was intended, right? Like the true aspects of Christianity or Judaism or Muslim or Islam, that you really are there with it in your heart.
Yeah. I think it's that it feels like right. So my parts that are manager driven can be like, here are the things that you need to do to be a good Christian, or these are things that you need to do to be a good Buddhist or someone who's Jewish or whatever that is. And that can be very manager driven and very do these tasks. And I think for me, IFS has helped me have this really incredible, deep sort of this experiencing. And so I'm experiencing, the world differently. I'm experiencing God differently, and has that experiential.
Right.
I'm sort of doing this thing with my hand, that's sort of a flowy
Right.
thing
Yeah.
that is
Exactly.
that I think yeah, it just feels different, right? So then this connection you have with whatever you believe spiritually, you have that experience that feels really different.
Yeah.
I'm
And
rolling my
then
eyes at myself because I'm like, oh.
you're like, except what I don't feel.
Yeah, except for when my manager's like,
Right. 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 In Judaism, there's a word called kavanah, which it really is about when you pray from your heart.
Mm,
And I really noticed that growing up. I went to a Jewish camp where it was very much like you just lived the culture. It wasn't like a separate piece where when I was home, I would go to regular school, then I would go to like Hebrew school, and I always hated it, and I'd go to services and I would hate it, and I would go to camp and I would love it. And it was and part of it is that when we would even have prayer services in the mornings, and it was just this beautiful thing where we'd be in a circle and we'd be like singing from our heart, and we might even be holding hands. And so like this whole concept of kavanah is like when you pray, you're really doing it from your heart. And you see so often, and I would go back to regular services, and I would see people just going through the motions. So it's almost like they're praying from their head, like, and from a rote kind of place. And
Yeah.
I always felt very turned off by it and very bored and very like this didn't feel sacred to me. And when we moved to the heart space, um, something else opens for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you suggest people, I don't even know if this is a question that you can answer, but how would you suggest people start incorporating so that's not separate? Like IFS isn't separate from their own spiritual tradition, that becomes this a place
Right.
in a way that they can incorporate both of them together. And then it that
Uh,
deepens each other, right?
right.
We can I think that's one of the beautiful things about IFS. It can add to whatever our spiritual tradition is.
Right. Um, I think the first question is say we go to a spiritual or to a service or to a ritual. It helps me sometimes in the beginning stages of IFS, like, how do I do this? There's a lot of beginners maybe listening. So I ask, like, who's here? Who's about to pray? Who's about to engage? Like, do I feel any urgency? Do I feel any desperation? Do I feel any boredom? Like, do I feel those C qualities? Am I feeling connected, or curious, compassionate? Um, and so when we ask who's here, we can just check in. There might be parts who went to a religious school. I know a lot of people went to like, religious schools, and they've been drummed. There's certain ways of doing things, and there's lots of maybe guilt and shame that's built in when you don't do things the right way. And um, so if you're sensing any of those parts, to really ask them just to see what it would be like, maybe even to sit next to you or to sit on your lap, and to see what it'd be like if you're just here for a moment, and see how when you start praying or you start um, conducting your ritual, how that feels to them, to watch you be there doing that, and how it connects to them. Um, and another thing that's really interesting is that we know that parts also have a self, and
Not to
that
make
they
things
have
even more
this.
confusing.
Right, exactly. But there's that sacred place in us when we get there, but they have that too.
Mm.
And sometimes I find it so healing for them just to notice, like, while we're here together, just notice inside of you that same light that I have, you have. And I actually believe that, because in Judaism, when we light the Sabbath candles and we light candles, it's supposed to represent the first light of creation. And I think that self energy is, like, we know, like, this, it's almost like this life force, or this thing that ties us all together. And my assumption is that maybe this light is like the first light
Mm.
of creation, and it's like this is what ties us all together, and our parts have that too. And there's actually moments where I've done this meditation with myself where I said, what if I just imagine seeing like a little point of light or a little ball of light in all my parts, and almost as if my whole body is just filled with like stars, right? Because all these parts each have this little light of self energy, and I have my self energy. And when I sit in that, it's like all of a sudden I just feel like what we call like that drop, or that where I don't have concerns. I just feel very at ease, and I feel connected to the universe and to everyone else. And so I think when we enter our prayers from that place, it's almost like we can feel this personal connection. And I think maybe, and I keep referring to Judaism because that's what I know, but I've always been told we just essentially have a personal connection. Like, we don't see even our rabbi isn't like a spiritual intermediary. The rabbi means teacher. So like everyone has a personal connection, and I think everyone does in Christianity and Muslim, and you may maybe that's what's taught there too. I'm not sure, but like we have like a direct line, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think that's what I mean, I guess in Catholicism maybe it's taught differently. Like the priest is sort of has a direct line, but I think that maybe is changing. I can't speak to that, but I grew up Catholic. It's funny that as you're talking about this because I've been really into, which I feel like really fits me now, is like a Christian contemplation where so I've been doing these contemplative meditation groups and they're just really more my jam. But
Yeah.
what's happening as I'm there is a part of me just constantly is giving me sort of this list of things to do. And as I was talking, I was like, right, because I remember growing up, going to Catholic church and being miserable. And I think I would maybe write lists of what I was going to do later, or I was always watching the clock, sort of something because it was so boring, something to.
Hmm.
And I didn't realize that, like something to occupy my mind. And so it's almost like, right, because that's, I think, what I did. And I'm
Makes a
also
lot
a
of
very
sense.
busy person, and so I often don't sit quiet. And so sitting like at church quiet was almost like parts of me that are like, "Oh, you're quiet. Let's,
Right.
talk to you now."
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the things I was thinking of is that when we notice those parts there, we they must have, like you said, they were there for a reason in the past,
Yeah.
and sitting in the same scene, it would be so easy for them to come back on board. And so that's why I love this question of what would it be like just to sit next to me and just watch and see what would, maybe it'll be different now. And there's always that updating, right? Like maybe they don't know that I'm an adult now and that I get to choose where I pray, and I'm not forced to be at this school. I'm not forced to be here. And that's another thing too, is I think there's, and I didn't mean for this whole topic to be on religion so much, because there's also this whole piece of spirituality I hope we get into as well. But um, it, I, I'm such a believer in creating safety, like for my clients, and it's my research my PhD research on organizations. How do you create safe place for people to have voice? And there's so many, oftentimes I feel like there's religious settings or spiritual settings that don't feel safe. So now
Yeah.
that we're adults, we can choose to be in safe places and we can commit to our parts that we're only going to go places that feel safe, and we're not going to put you in places anymore that don't feel safe.
Let me ask you about spiritual bypass because this phrase comes up a lot, and I just saw it today on like this I think it was like an Instagram post from someone. I was like, this is so interesting. So tell me what spiritual bypass is and why should we be aware of it?
Okay, thank you. Um, so for one thing, I think that all of us are who are engaged in some kind of healing practice or using IFS or in spiritual practices. My sense is that so we could feel a sense of ease and calm in healing. And I think a lot of spiritual practices offer that promise. And and I think they do offer that. But again, who is practicing? So
Mm,
oftentimes we have parts that so want healing, they so want to feel better, to feel peace, that they kind of dive into these spiritual practices. And when a part is doing it, there's always unintended consequences. Um, so, for instance, one unintended consequences is that we fall into a state that feels very self like we might feel a calm, we might feel an ease, or like even we're shutting out our parts. But the unintended consequences is that our parts are still left alone. So our exiles are still alone. They don't have us. That means our protectors still have to continue their work. And maybe for that moment, everybody relaxes, because even if self is truly there in that moment, like I've gotten to a place, because a lot of my practices, like there's two ways of of being in self. There's the constraint release where we ask our parts to step aside. And then there's techniques to simply just drop into self. And I feel like when you drop into self, your parts do go, oh, Seth is here. So good. Because he's like our trusted leader, trusted teacher. They know me enough now that they do relax. The problem is if I only do that, they're still not healed. So when my wife says something that triggers my exiles, my protectors flare up and they do the same stuff they've been doing all the time. Or, so we get triggered again and again and again. And what I've noticed is so it's more of an and. So I have those practices and I work with my parts from this place of self. Then those parts are healed and the protectors don't have to work so hard. They even drop a lot of the roles. So now I don't get triggered by these things. And with spiritual bypass, what we're doing, I think, is we're finding either maybe it's not full self or maybe it's self-like energy, even if it is in like where you're in a deep meditative space, even that wave aspect of self where we're feeling that deep connected meditative high end energy state. In that moment our parts are fully relaxed, but it doesn't mean they've been witnessed and healed. So it's really just pausing healing until we actually go to our parts and listen to them. So some of my clients have really experienced self and they're like, why don't I just try to stay in self as much as possible and just have techniques to be in self? I'm like, I do that a lot because I need to be there for my clients. I need to drop in as fast as possible when something big happens with my clients. But there's an and if I don't work with my parts, things aren't going to change for me.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, and then I'm going to ask you about the particle and the wave thing. So
Mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing you say is if I just meditate, like say even if I do my centering prayer, which is what I'm doing centering prayer. So if I go and I do my 20 minutes of centering prayer and repeat my sacred word, I feel lots of self energy. My parts are relaxed. I feel connected to the divine. I feel connected to my body. I feel fantastic, but I haven't been with my parts. I haven't been witnessing them. I haven't been with my exiles. I've done, and it's a good thing. Like, I've felt self energy and I've felt all these good things, but I need to do this other thing too. And so what happens a lot of times is people just do that. They just do meditation or they just engage in spiritual practices, whatever that is, and that feels really good, but it's not going to the parts.
Right. And I think there are times as well that my assumption is that sometimes if we're not in self, we could be in a little bit of a dissociation firefighter that kind of numbs us to the things it feels like we're calm. I'm just curious about that. I'm not saying I know that for sure, but I get a sense that there's because when I've meditated in the past, I think I've kind of lulled myself into a state where it doesn't feel like self. It felt more like I was like drugging myself with my own consciousness.
Yeah,
And
that
I
is
think
such
that's
a good point, right? Because
that's
numbing can
another
feel so
spiritual.
good. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if I wanted to. I was probably just going to repeat myself. So go ahead.
No, that's okay. I
I do
repeat
that a
myself
lot. My
too.
wife's like, you don't need to say it 5 different times. I heard it the first time. So,
I say things twice, and I know it because I edit this podcast, and I'm like, oh
yeah.
my gosh, why are you saying it twice? Say it once.
Yeah.
I
Thank
love that
you.
idea, and I love that just noticing that, right? Sort of so whenever you're participating in whatever you're doing and you're doing your spiritual connection, just pay attention to is there a numbing part there? And like you said, like asking who's here and who's up, and is there a numbing? And how does that feel different? Like really tuning in to how does that numbing feel different than self? Because I think it does feel different.
Yeah. And, I have used the term litmus test. Like, so, like, like those little sticks you put in the water to test the chemicals. So you can ask about the C's, like, do I feel curious? Do I feel compassion? Do I feel connected? Another thing is, when we're to see if we're in self, I look at how others are reacting around me. So if I'm leading a service or I'm leading a ritual, you know, are are people kind of pulling away from me? Are they not, you know, and it's like with parenting, like when my kids aren't reacting well to me, instead of pointing at them, I'm like, oh gosh, let me check myself. And 99.9% of the time, I'm talking from a part, therefore they are reacting from a part. So and same thing with spirituality, that I think we need to have these little litmus tests to say, am I in, and everybody finds their own. Um, and for me, the C's at different times were, when I first started, it was more like, am I curious? And now I think it's more, am I compassionate? And, and now I think I'm even moving to, am I feeling courage?
I like it.
Because I once I lock those in, it's like I have those are well tuned in C qualities, and for me, like courage, I think is the new level of self energy that I'm tapping into, just to really sit in my seat and feel comfortable that I'm okay, and I'm not going to get kicked out of the IFS world, and I'm not going to, all these different things
Yeah.
that parts worry about.
I love that. I love too. I think one of my tells is my face. I can feel it in the sort of softening in my face. I don't even realize how thinking and tense and jaw tension,
Mm.
sort of one. So one of
So
my,
checking your body,
yeah, yeah, it's a
that's a
big one
great
for
one.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a really great one. How's my body feeling?
yeah. Tell me about this particle and wave, because so what is this? It reminds me of that book, like in level one, you've got to read this book, that The Mosaic Mind. Did you read that
Mm-hmm.
book?
Mm-hmm.
And Dick does
Long time
this,
ago.
yeah, right. And Dick does this explanation of self, and self being a particle and self being a wave. And it's very smart and intellectual. And
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah,
think
so
he also rewrote that in his the latest IFS book, the text. So I think it's in there
okay,
too, if people want to look there. Um, the
which is
way I
probably an
see
easier
it,
read than The Mosaic
I
Mind.
think so. The Mosaic Mind is a hard read.
Yeah,
It's very academic.
yeah.
Um, okay, so I look at it like this: that if we think of self as a wave state, that my self energy is no different than yours. It's no different than my clients. And I try to tell clients, because when clients come to me, they come specifically for IFS. So we talk about IFS, where some therapists, for instance, don't. As a practitioner, we talk about it openly because that's why they're here. Um, but we all share this. If we do say this light of creation, or this light of the universe, or the starlight, whatever you want to call it, we all share the same light, and that light is all connected to what we would call a source of whatever that may be. So when we really get into this state where our parts have given us so much room, and we really just like sink into that level of connection, that we're all coming almost like a river of self energy below us that's tapping into all of us, like we go into that river. Um, then we kind of feel such an when people talk about expansiveness, like there's this deep expansiveness, almost like a meditative ethereal state, where you're not probably able to function like around. You almost have to have your eyes closed or be in like a meditative state to feel that. um so there's that as a wave, and you might even think of it as an ocean, like as the ocean itself is like the wave, like there's no separation. But then there's a drop in the ocean, right? Like a raindrop. And I think as self as particle, we are like that drop. We're also like, although we are connected, we also have our own individuality. We have our own personality. We have our own consciousness that allows us for me to say I'm Seth, and for you to be Tammy. And when I'm in self as particle, I still have all those C qualities. I still have feeling connected, but I'm almost like, it's almost particle to me is like I'm intensely self-led. So I'm in relation with my parts. I'm able to talk for my parts. I'm not operating out of fear. I'm feeling confident, clear, collected, humble, all those things. So I'm feeling self energy as a unique person, and I'm able to function talking to you and being with people. Um, and I feel like because I'm also tapping into that wave energy, that's where wisdom, like Dick says, self energy carries wisdom. So it's from a spiritual side, when we tap into the wisdom of the universe, for instance, it is right there, like that river below us that flows through us. Like we have the experiences of all of us. Like William James said, like the stream of consciousness, right? So like our own conscious is all connected. Um, so I don't know if that's making sense, but
Yeah, yeah. So, right. So it sounds like it's both things, right? I don't need to repeat it. I'm doing that thing again. But no,
yeah,
I think that makes sense. And it sounds like then it's right that that self energy that's in me, there's also this all this unique stuff about me that makes me me. But then when I'm with you and this self in me and the self in you, there becomes more of the wave happens or the wisdom between us and sort of that self energy deepens when there's self energy together, and
yeah,
that's the wave.
and
I'm
I
asking that
think
with
you
a
could
question.
experience it. You could experience it yourself too. Like say you, for instance, for me, one of my favorite meditations is Dick's path meditation, where you
Yep.
go somewhere and you ask all your parts to separate and you sit somewhere. To me, that's where I first felt the depth of self energy. So as my parts separate and I'm sitting, I have this certain place I always go in my mind into certain woods, and now it's all developed. I got a fire pit and I got a lean-to, and I got places where my preschool teacher parts take care of the little ones, and all mine like to be in the woods with me, and I go on after. They don't like to hang out in the parking lot. They want to be in.
Yeah.
But so once I'm there in my mind and I'm sitting in my chair doing this meditation, all of a sudden I enter the wave state, which feels like this deep, almost like I've never done transcendental meditation, but I sense something like that I'm connecting to something larger than me. I'm feeling the connectedness of us all.
Mm.
And like right now, I could also do it with you. As I'm here, I could like go, oh yeah, I could feel Tammy's essence because we're all connected. So I feel like I'm tapping into that wave. Like if I'm a drop in the ocean and there's a drop a mile away, because we're all water, I'm connected to you.
Yeah.
But
It's
I'm also,
beautiful.
as a drop, I have my own consciousness,
Yeah.
and I can do that alone. I can do that with you.
I love
So
that.
it's really a state of mind, like the wave state. We get to a place where we just really sense that there's something more than us. It's not just about me. It's we're connected to everything.
Tell me about connecting with guides. What
Okay,
that even what
so
does it mean? Like what is a
right,
guide and what does it mean for us to connect to guides?
okay. So my understanding um, is that I mean, different people have talked about guides in different ways, but what I sense is these are like parts, like entities with consciousness. Sometimes you might think of them as your spirits. You might think of them as your ancestors, your power animals. You might think of them as in different things. Um, I personally, and I say this, I think this because I feel like you get these little downloads. Like it's like this was a gift. I feel like to me at one point where it feels like they are like an intermediary between you and source. So if God is your source or however you see source. So as some people would see like angels, right? They're like somewhere in between. They're not God, they're not people, but they're kind of like in between, and they could come and they could help. So IFS, the people that have developed or have even witnessed, not so much developed, like this have through working with people, these things just happen. Like you'll be unburdening, and all of a sudden this figure would show up. And then we ask the figure, "Are you a guide?" And they always will say yes or no. The first we ask, "Are you a part?" Just to see is it a part.
Right.
And then if they say no, because parts can't lie, we ask, "Are you a guide?" And what I find is they are essentially the epitome of self energy. Like they are just so like these like figures of grace and of purity and love and compassion that are simply there to help be
Mm.
present and to heal. It's almost like they're unharmable. Like you just sense their presence of
Mm.
like they have a lot of divine in them. And we believe from our experience that everybody has guides, whether or not you've met them or not. Like you might say, gosh, somebody was here for me. Somebody just like I just missed that accident, or or I just got a thought in my head. I feel like somebody's watching over me, and a lot of times
Yeah.
we think of them as angels or things like
Right.
that. And through my practice, I've met my guides, and I definitely feel like, you know, when I first met my guides, I felt like it was almost like helped me intensify my self energy. Like the guides that I met, I don't like to say exactly who or what they are, but this mine was more of a structure and not like an animal or human looking thing. And I found that when I needed more self energy, if I just kind of think about this guide, it would come in this almost like pour self energy into, like I would almost like a source into my crown. Like it would take more it would increase my level of self energy. So if I have a client who's really struggling and I'm like, what do I do? I'm new to IFS. What question do I ask? Oh my God. And I'm like, okay, I need to get that part to set aside, but I need more self energy. I would think I would kind of bring in this guide, and all of a sudden I would get self energy. And I would sometimes notice it would come into my head, and like I'd be able to almost like shoot it out of my heart at my client, like almost just like
Wow.
surround them with self energy. And I would notice like 99% of the time, they would all of a sudden kind of calm, and they would kind of get into self. They would at least be able to be with whatever's happening
Mm.
instead of it being totally flooding. So I also think that when our guides are around, it's almost like it increases our level of self energy. And also, you can ask, like, I don't, yeah, I guess when people say, like Dick has mentioned, like guides will talk to him, and other people say that. And I don't, it's not for me, it's not like a actual conversation, but it's more like I'm with it. I'll kind of ask and I'll just know the
Mm.
answer.
Yeah, I
You know,
love that.
and that happens a lot with my clients where I'll just say, ask about this. I'll be like, hold on, just hold on. No, ask about it. Like, then I'll
Yeah,
know, like, it kind of feels like I'm being led.
I love that. What makes it feel like that's not self? Like what, like that, when you're like, oh, I think I should ask this, or sort of you get a hunch, or you sort of are so like connected to a client and you say a thing, or, um,
Right.
oh yeah, how do you know that that's not just self talking to
Okay.
you?
For me, it's a felt thing. Like, there's most of the time it is just self. Like, I'll just be clear. Like, I know to hold back, to be still. Don't try to, like, impart what my parts think is happening. I might have a hunch, but self energy and being in self tells me, ask the question, like have asked the part what it wants you to know. And so I think when I'm in self, you do just have access to knowing.
Mm,
But then there's times that all of a sudden something will happen where it almost feels like it comes in,
mm.
like this question just hit me. Not like, oh, I can feel like this is the right way to go. It's almost like a gift. Like this question just came.
Okay, so
And it
what
felt
I'm
like
gonna,
it came. I'm showing it from the right side. Like I keep feeling like it's coming in from like the right side of my head. Like, oh, something was just.
right.
And then,
Yeah,
you
that's what
know,
I want you to just, okay, that's exactly what I was about to say.
yeah.
You're doing something with your hand. So when you're saying a guide is coming, you're using your hand and you're reaching sort of above your head, coming sort of swooping down through your head, pushing through, and it's sort of so the guide is sort of coming from above you down. And then when you talk about self, you're using your hand towards your heart and you're doing sort of a out from your
Okay.
heart out. So you've done
Yeah.
that the whole time. And so I was just about to
Okay.
say, you're doing this thing. So the
Wow.
guide
I
feels
didn't
like it's
even know
kind
I
of
was doing
coming
that.
from up. It's coming from up and coming down. And when it's self, it feels like it's coming from your heart, coming out. And you didn't know you were doing
Right.
that?
No. And again, I just want to say like that might just be how my system experiences it. And
Right.
for anyone else listening, you might feel that guides come up from your root. They might come up, they might just come in from the deep depths of your heart. So, as an educator, I know that the best teachers meet people in a way that they can understand, and they go based on their prior knowledge. So I think these guides are like if they're good teachers, they come to people in a way that they understand. Like, why do I see my guides this way, and why do you see your guides that way? Or why did Jesus come to this group, but Muhammad came to this group, and Buddhists came? I think the same source, but the wise teacher goes to people in a way they can understand. And I think our guides come to us that way. So I really want to honor everyone's personal experience. Like, it's not like, oh, it's not like Seth said it should be this, because then we have parts that are like striving to be like me
Right.
or to be like you. But if we trust that I'm being told things in a way
Yeah.
that's unique
Well, I
to me
think
that's
I
really
think that
important.
right. Okay. And it sounds like one of the really good takeaways is for people um, just to be really paying attention to like when I have a hunch or so sort of like all of a sudden something happens, like where am I noticing that? Where am I noticing it in my body, or if I hear something three times, and maybe just starting to ask, so paying attention and asking inside, is that self? Is that a part? And yeah, so just sort
Yes.
of asking, inviting people to pay attention and ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just, it was, we're talking about guides. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but one thing I've been noticing is, and I think this is how Dick developed the model, is like he sees consistency among people enough times that this is something. It's not just a one-time thing. So, none of my clients know each other clients. They don't talk to each other, but certain people will have experiences where they bring in even the religious figures. Like, some folks have, well, Jesus will actually show up for them and be there for the healing. Or oftentimes, a lot of people do have Mary Magdalene, or they have Kuan Yin. Um, so I've actually always related to Moses in a lot of ways, even though he's not seen as like necessarily like part of, like, I mean, I think everyone has God in them, but he was seen as a person, but connected to God. And I was actually Ed Yeats, uh, who was on your show.
Yeah.
He did a shamanist IFS exercise, and during this one, he did the path meditation, and during that, you kind of create this sacred fire and bring your guides. All of a sudden, there was this,
Mm,
looked like a teenage guy with like kind of brownish skin and black curly hair. And I've always related to Moses because I make these stupid mistakes. Like, he never made it to the promised land. He hit the rock with the stick. He did all these, dropped it, threw the tablets down. Like, I've always had those moments. And I look over and I see this teen leaning against a rock, and I'm like, Moses? And he's like, mm-hmm. He just kind of gave me this look.
gosh.
And
Wow.
so you could say I'm making it up, but I really felt like, wow. And this was before, he was, the leader. He was just kind of like a teenager hanging out in
I
Egypt.
know. Poor guy.
But so for a lot of people, these figures seem to show up for them really
Mm,
consistently. Um, and they offer a ton of healing and
yeah. And
support to the people's parts.
yeah, I love that. And I think there is this thing about IFS, and my clients have said it too, and I've thought it too. Like, am I making this up? But then you're like, well, some of the stuff that happens, it's so unusual, but it all ends up making sense. And you're like, there's no way I could have made this up. I'm not that smart. Like, I'm not, and I'm not that creative. Like, to put it all together.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
Exactly. Um, when I was living in Oregon in my 20s, I used to, like, keep a notebook, and it was during my hippie days. I had long hair, and um, there's a lot of stories around that. But
Can you send me a
one time,
picture so I can
yeah,
put up
I will.
the okay. I want a hippie Seth picture.
Okay, okay. One day it hit me. I was like, okay, so we have this stuff we call supernatural, and we have things that are called natural. And I'm like, okay, could it be that since we only use a small portion of our brain, that things that are supernatural are actually just natural, but we can't seem to comprehend it? Like, what if we were able to comprehend it? Would it just be natural?
Mm,
And for my life and for my living experience, it's not supernatural anymore. So when I'm with guides and I'm with these figures, it's just natural. It's just normal.
mm,
And I think that's because I've opened myself to it enough that I don't have fear. And that's
mm,
what Dick says with all of this stuff, that if the parts that have fear is what blocks us from connecting to our guides, blocks us from connecting to self. Is get scared of if an entity shows up, or if, somebody who's grieving over a parent who passed we might ask in the session, would you like to connect to this person, to say the things you wish you could have said? And again, 99.9% of the time, this person shows.
Yeah.
And Dick believes that once you pass, you spontaneously unburden. So you get to experience the best part of this person, like this,
Mm,
maybe of a father who wasn't there now can be, because he
mm,
is not burdened anymore. And we can connect with the spirit. Like I connect with my father all the time who's passed.
mm. Well, so, and
Are
then
you
you
there?
end up having
Yeah.
this supernatural experience, right? Like, sort of, I was thinking about for so many people, even experiencing self can feel like a supernatural experience. And then if you're in the middle of an
Right.
unburdening and your father shows up and you're having a connection with him, your exile that was so hurt by him is having a connection to his self. That is a supernatural experience that we would have never thought we would be able to have or do again. It's
Right.
amazing.
And if you did it often, it might just feel natural.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my point, is that I think this idea that supernatural is something, ooh, it's out there, might not be so out there. Many traditions connecting with spirits is how you are, how you act, right? So like when you like pray, like when Native American people, pray in a sweat lodge, you connect to your ancestors. When I've done sweats, and I've been lucky enough to do it with folks who really know what they're doing, um, I connected with people that have passed, and I was able to be with them.
Yeah.
And I want to say that when I was in self, I was right. Then I come back the next time. It's like I'm Mr. Spiritual. I'm going to do this sweat lodge, and it's almost like I feel like my white man part comes up. I can do this. I'm a spiritual guy, and I go into sweat lodge, and it's so hot that I'm like curled up on the floor, crying, thinking I'm not going to make it because I'm not in self. Right? I had a spiritual part that thinks like I'm Mr. Sweat Lodge guy now. But the first time I did it, I was so humble that I was just in self,
Mhm.
that these beautiful things just kind of happened. So I think that's another risk of doing rituals when you're not in self, is that things don't go the way you thought they were going to go. It becomes much harder. It might be painful. It might be scary because we're approaching it not from a clean place.
Right, right. When we have sort of a self-righteous place. Yeah, doesn't go the same way. And we can be very self-righteous in our religion, right? Whatever religion
Yeah.
that is. And even if you're going to the sweat lodge religion,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
a funny story.
Yeah.
Um, well, right. And the other thing about the supernatural thing being natural is how much of that is cultural, right? Like
That's right.
so much probably is natural about the supernatural in different cultures.
Right. That's right. It's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah. That was your point.
Yeah.
You're like,
Thank you.
that's what I said.
No, did I come across like that? I hope not.
No, no,
Okay.
no, not at all. There's a part of me that was like,
Yeah.
yeah, dummy. It's sort of there's an
No,
inside
no,
voice
no,
that
no,
said
no.
that to me. It was my part that said, yeah, dummy.
Yeah.
That's
Then I
why
had a
he
part that
explained
says,
that.
"Gosh, I wish I would have been more clear if that's just."
So in the
Yeah.
end, I want to hear a little bit about, because I love this and I think this has been huge for me, about moving from head to heart.
For me, this is a little technique for dropping into self. Um, so I'll often say is, and maybe you can do this with me, and the listeners can do it. Is just start noticing all the activity above your shoulders, like I'm thinking, I'm contemplating, or I might be worrying, I'm paying attention, and notice that our attention is here in our head. And so what I try to do is this slowly drop our attention so it almost like sinks like an elevator down. You might not see your attention in your throat, and then see what happens when your attention hits your heart. Like right now, what happened for me, I almost got chills through my body. My whole body got calm, because I think self energy for me centers around my heart, because that's where compassion and like open heartedness and so I almost think that our heart can see, like we know that now neurological activity like happens in your heart can think. What does your heart say? What does your heart tell you? So does our gut. But when we can look through our heart almost like it has a lens. So if I like even close my eyes and drop my attention into my heart, and I like try to see my system or see my parts or just like feel the world through this heart lens, we instantly kind of find that self feeling.
I love that. Yeah, what happened for me is actually was really feeling this more of a tension in my shoulders when I thought about what was above, sort of this tension in my shoulders. And as I had it come down to my heart, I felt this warmth in my heart and then instantly a warmth in my gut. Before
Mm,
you even said that gut thing, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then you said the
yeah,
gut thing. So it's like, yeah, it
and I
kind of
think
went
our
all the way
and
down.
yeah, and Susan McConnell, she's really talking a lot about that, about how we can really sense the world from our head. What does our head say? What does our heart say? What does our gut say? And I think our gut really just knows if we're safe or not safe. And when we're in our heart, I think our gut feels for me, when I'm in my heart, my gut can relax. Right. Because when I'm in my
Oh,
head, I'm thinking about all the things that aren't safe and all my concerns and worries, and my gut's getting all stirred up. And then when I drop into my heart, my gut's like, oh God, thanks, we're safe.
that's amazing. Wow, yeah. Thank you for leading us that with that, and I hope the listeners either they did that or they could just, rewind this, 30 seconds and do that because that felt good. I feel really relaxed now.
Yeah, it's really helpful when you need to get ready to be with a client, or if you need to have a big conversation with somebody and you're feeling scared, or
Mm,
you're in the middle of an argument and you really want to calm down. If you just want to start your session with your own parts, to me that's almost like a ritual that I do when I don't feel like I'm landed. I'm not there. Like I'm about to start a session with a client. I'm just like I'm in my head. I'm busy. I'm like, oh, I got three more clients, or you know. So when I do that, I'm like, now I'm here.
love it. I love it. I love it. That's great. Um, Anything else? I know we only have a few more minutes, but that was really great,
Um,
Seth.
I think the biggest thing for me that's my biggest like level of growth recently is, and I feel like this was a gift for me from one of my guides. Was this message is that it's really not about me.
Mm,
And I've heard Dick say that, like, oh, this didn't come through me. But there's a part of me is like, yeah, but you're the master, dude. And now I'm really getting a sense of what that means. Is like when it's like when if this talk is about me, like getting people to like me because I'm saying these things, and ooh, Seth's this guy. The things I'm saying are not from self, because it's like parts that want to be liked, want to be loved, want to be included in this wonderful IFS community, and it's not clean. And
mm,
when I really realize like this healing, this self energy that I'm sharing with people isn't just my self energy. It's like it's not. It's bigger than me. And then these messages that are coming through that we're sharing with people is bigger than me. It's like I'm this conduit that I feel like we are in a more clean, deeper space. And the minute we think this is about me sharing information, me helping people, me doing these things, that we are like inviting parts to take over. And when we think of it as me, it's about me. That's another litmus test to say, oh, I'm probably not in as much self as I could be, because self isn't afraid of it not being about me. My
yeah,
parts are terrified of
yeah,
like, what do you mean it's not about me? Because they want to be loved and they want to be accepted. And if it,
yeah.
they don't want to be left behind. But self is like, I'm already connected with everything. It's not about me. I'm sharing what is.
Mm, that's great. I love it. Um, it's hard for me to think now because I feel so like calm and relaxed. Now I need to function.
Yay.
I'm like, wait,
So
crap, I gotta
bring back the
function.
particle.
Yeah,
We'll bring back,
exactly. I'm totally in the
right.
wave. I'm feeling super flowy. Um, I always end with the last question about what would you rather be doing instead? And so I don't know if there's something that comes to mind when you think about, I know you have such an interesting, fun,
Yeah.
creative life, but is there anything that you'd
Yeah.
love to do instead?
I mean, honestly, IFS is the thing that I feel like I've searched my whole life for something that I could really be my whole self and be challenged and never get bored. And IFS really is it. But if I was like told, okay, you're not doing that anymore, you have to do something else. I mean, I would love to be just like like a crazy artist that just goes from art fair to art fair, selling my wares and making up whatever comes next, and something like that. Or um, I think I told you before, I'd like trick out a old school bus and just travel from art fair to art fair.
Yeah, I love it.
But I can, I would still want to do IFS sessions with people like at the fair. So
Right. Well, that's the thing I think what you're saying is right. You really have created a life where, you are doing art and you are right. It's all part of that's why I love the idea of IFS um, helps us connect to our spirituality because it helps us connect to our whole being. So my artist parts and my, your hippie
Mhm.
parts and your, parts that want to go to the art fair, like all those parts could get included
Right.
in the IFS
Yeah.
bubble.
And one thing, if you have another second, do we have time for one more statement?
Sure.
What I've noticed over this break was for the past 2 weeks, I took off clients. I didn't see any clients. And I really kind of engaged in more firefighter activity. Like I stayed up late, drank tons of coffee, maybe, party or whatever you do. And then what I notice is it's kind of like when you're when you're doing exercise and you work out every day and you just stop for 2 weeks. And when you try to get back into it, it's really tough.
Yeah.
And I tell my clients, and I've noticed this for myself, that working with your parts and being and like trying to live a self-led life is kind of a daily practice, even if it's momentarily. Just as I go to visit my mom and I have my little toddler parts getting upset when she says things, that I put my arms around them as I'm listening to her. Just doing little things to be with your parts on a daily basis. You're able to keep your strength in your IFS
Mm,
practice. And when you kind of go away from it and you only say you see your practitioner every other week or once a month or just once a week, and that's all you do, you kind of lose your strength and your ability to be, at least for me. And
yeah. Yeah.
so this last 2 weeks really taught me that a daily practice is really important, just like it is for working out or eating well or whatever you're doing for your health. That just to be with your parts on a daily basis doesn't have to be for long, even for 5 minutes. You're able to keep your flow. And I've noticed by getting away for 2 weeks, I really have a lot of compassion for my clients who don't, they say, oh, yeah, I haven't checked in and I see you every other week, and why it's so hard to get back into the flow.
Yeah.
So I guess my recommendation is to really do something daily just to even check your level of self energy. Like, where am I? I think Dick says even if you're at 30% of self energy, you could be self led. You're not blended by
Mm,
your parts. So how much am I in self right now? Am I in 50? Am I in 30? Okay, can I just expand that self energy a little more? Like maybe I can bump it up to 50. Let me just take a couple breaths and go into my heart. Okay, now I'm at 50. That feels better. Okay, so just doing things like that on a daily basis, it becomes normal part of your life to be living more in self, with self energy, than kind of being parts led for 2 weeks or for a full week and then just doing an IFS session.
yeah. Thank you, Seth. That was good advice. And I thank you for taking the time. And I feel lots of self energy right now.
I'm glad. Thank you so much for doing this for the world. I mean,
Oh, thanks, Seth.
people are able just to have this free resource just to come and listen, and the way you are with people is so wonderful and friendly and loving, and you like exemplify curiosity, and I mean it's so great how
Oh,
you do this.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.